There are royal rumors, and then there are the kind of rumors that don't just raise eyebrows, they change the entire way people look at a marriage. Because according to claims now exploding across royal commentary circles, Prince Harry may be hiding something far bigger than anyone expected. Not a small disagreement. Not another carefully managed public appearance. Not just more whispers about distance and tension behind the scenes. But something much more personal. Much more dangerous. And if these claims are even partly true, then the story the public has been watching for the last 2 years may not be the real story at all. Because Lady Colin Campbell, one of the most controversial, connected, and unfiltered royal commentators in the world, has now hinted at something that has sent royal watchers into absolute overdrive. A woman. A new woman. A woman close enough to Harry's world to understand it. A woman who, according to what is being claimed, may have become far more important to him than anybody outside that circle realized. And if you think this is just another piece of overblown gossip, stay with me. Because once you look at the pattern, the separate appearances, the solo travel, the increasingly different public lives, the growing silence, the strange body language, the timing, what first sounds unbelievable starts to feel disturbingly plausible. So what exactly did Lady C say? Why has it caused such a strong reaction? Who is this mystery woman supposed to be? And why are so many people now saying the same thing, that this didn't come out of nowhere, that the signs may have been there for a long time, and that this could explain far more than one scandalous rumor ever should? Let's break it down carefully. First, context matters. Because Lady Colin Campbell is not treated by royal audiences the same way an anonymous social media account is treated. She is not some faceless gossip page throwing out outrageous claims for clicks. She is a long-time royal biographer, commentator, and society figure who has built an entire reputation around saying the things other people are too cautious to say directly. Whether people love her or hate her, one thing is undeniable: when she speaks, people listen. And more importantly, people listen because she usually knows exactly how far she can go. That matters here. Because Lady C did not come out and scream a name. She did not slap down a neat, court-ready accusation. She did something more effective than that. She suggested. She implied. She framed. She used careful language, the kind of language that tells you the speaker is fully aware of the legal line and is determined not to cross it while still making sure you understand the shape of what she is saying. And what she is saying, in essence, is this: Harry may have formed a serious attachment to another woman. A woman around his age. A woman described as suitable, discreet, and emotionally significant. A woman allegedly in his wider social orbit. And crucially, this is being discussed not as a casual flirtation, not as a silly rumor from nowhere, but as something weightier, something that could have major consequences if ever fully brought into the light. Now stop there for a second and ask yourself, if this were being said about almost anyone else in the celebrity world, would the reaction be this intense? Probably not. But Harry is not just any celebrity. He is a prince who left the monarchy in dramatic fashion, publicly defended his marriage, publicly reframed his family, publicly rewrote his life story, and built an entirely new identity around the idea that he and Meghan had chosen truth, freedom, and authenticity over performance and pressure. That is why these rumors matter so much. Because if there really is another woman somewhere in the background of this story, then it doesn't just create scandal. It creates contradiction. It reopens every unanswered question people have had about the Sussex marriage. It forces people to look again at everything they thought they understood. And that is exactly why this story has hit so hard. Now, here is where things get more interesting. Lady C's comments did not land in a vacuum. They landed in an environment that had already been prepared by months, arguably years, of public observation. Because whatever anyone thinks of Harry and Meghan as a couple, even supporters have noticed that something feels different. The polished image of complete unity has looked increasingly difficult to maintain. Their schedules have not simply looked busy. They have looked separate. Their appearances have not simply looked independent. They have looked disconnected. And their public rhythm no longer feels like that of a couple moving through the same plan together. It feels, at times, like two parallel brands operating in the same headline but not always in the same emotional space. That shift didn't happen overnight. Little by little, people started noticing that Meghan was appearing alone more often. Harry was traveling alone more often. Projects were being talked about separately. Initiatives felt less shared. Even the energy around them changed. There was a period when every appearance was sold as a united front, a hand-in-hand message, a carefully staged image of solidarity. But then the pictures changed. The rhythm changed. The public began to see more solo moments, more distance, more quiet gaps between the moments that were supposed to reassure everyone. And once that perception starts settling in, every new rumor suddenly finds fertile ground. That is what makes Lady C's suggestion so potent. It plugs directly into an existing feeling people already had. It gives narrative shape to a sense that many viewers had struggled to put into words.
Not certainty. Not proof. But suspicion.
A growing suspicion that the official version and the visible version were no longer perfectly aligned. Now let's talk about the woman at the center of all this. Or rather, the outline of the woman, because no confirmed identity has been publicly established in any legitimate sense. According to the description being circulated, this is not supposed to be some random stranger from a headline fantasy. The implication is that she is someone who belongs to the same broad social environment Harry now inhabits. Someone familiar with wealth. Familiar with privacy. Familiar with elite circles. Someone who would understand the rules of discretion without needing them explained.
In other words, not chaos. Not publicity-seeking drama.
But the opposite. A woman who could move quietly. A woman whose greatest asset in a story like this would be precisely the fact that she is not obvious. And that alone changes the tone of the rumor completely. Because the image being painted here is not of reckless tabloid scandal. It is of something quieter.
Potentially deeper.
Something that may not have started with fireworks, but with understanding.
With proximity. With comfort.
With the one thing Harry, more than almost anyone in the public eye, has spent his entire life desperately chasing: emotional safety. And that is where this gets complicated. Because if you look back at Harry's history, one theme returns again and again: the conflict between love and exposure. His earlier relationships were repeatedly framed as casualties of royal pressure, media obsession, and a life that made ordinary intimacy nearly impossible. With Chelsea Davy, there was affection, history, and by many accounts a real bond, but also a level of intrusion that became unbearable. With Cressida Bonus, similar questions followed. Could any relationship survive the constant glare? Could Harry ever have something real while still being Harry? Then Meghan entered the picture, and the entire promise of that chapter was that this time would be different. This time, he had found the person who would not just love him, but fight beside him. This time, he was choosing a new life rather than simply enduring an old one. This time, the escape itself was part of the love story. But here is the uncomfortable thought now haunting this conversation. What if the setting changed, but the emotional trap did not? What if California did not become freedom, but merely a different kind of pressure? What if royal captivity was replaced by brand captivity? What if the palace walls disappeared only to be replaced by cameras, streaming contracts, social media scrutiny, and a public narrative that required constant maintenance? What if Harry did not leave performance behind at all? What if he just changed stages? Once you ask that question, the rumor about another woman starts to feel less like random scandal and more like a possible symptom of something much larger. Because people do not usually drift emotionally for no reason. If drift is happening, and to be absolutely clear, that remains speculation, not confirmed fact, then people immediately start asking why. Was the marriage strained long before anyone said so? Did their goals start separating? Did the intense public pressure create private resentments? Did the life they built together stop resembling the life one or both of them actually wanted? These are the questions now hanging over every new appearance. And then there is Meghan. One reason this rumor has become so explosive is that the public imagination instantly fills in the emotional fallout. If Harry has indeed grown close to someone else, what would Meghan's reaction be?
Anger? Humiliation? Relief? A calculated silence?
The competitor-style gossip space loves this angle because it creates a second story inside the first one, not just is there another woman, but what happens if Meghan knows? That is where narratives become emotionally addictive. Because viewers are not just watching events. They are mentally staging scenes. A discovered message.
A tense conversation.
Separate rooms. Strategic appearances.
Managed smiles.
Suddenly every old clip looks different. Every public photo gets reinterpreted. Every solo outing becomes evidence. Every neutral expression becomes meaning. And that is exactly how scandal stories grow legs online. But here's the thing, the most effective version of this story is not the loudest version. It is the version that stays careful. Because the moment you overstate unverified claims, the audience stops leaning in and starts checking out. The competitor's script understood that. It never fully jumps, it hovers. It implies gravity without closing every door. That is why it works. So if we are looking at this the same way, the real power of the rumor is not in saying Harry definitely has a girlfriend. The real power is in asking why so many people are suddenly prepared to believe it. That is a much bigger question. It forces us to look at the public image of Harry himself. Because there has been a visible transformation in how people talk about him. There was a time when Harry was widely seen as the warm, funny, slightly rebellious prince, damaged, yes, but deeply human and strangely easy to root for. Over time, that image became more complicated. He started looking more burdened, more defensive, more isolated. Supporters called him brave. Critics called him bitter. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: the lightness that once defined him seemed harder to find. And that matters because when audiences sense unhappiness, they start writing explanations for it. A new woman becomes one possible explanation. Not because anyone has proven it, but because people are already searching for the missing piece. And Lady C, whether intentionally or not, has handed them one. Now let's go even deeper. One of the most striking parts of this entire conversation is how often people compare Harry's emotional position now to patterns within his own family history. That is a dangerous comparison, and one that should never be made lazily. But it keeps coming back for a reason.
Royal stories
Repeat themselves in eerie ways.
Duty versus desire. Appearance versus truth.
Marriage as institution versus marriage as intimacy. Public narrative versus private reality. These themes are old in that family.
Very old.
And so when observers hear talk of emotional distance, outside attachment, carefully managed public images, and a prince who may be quietly unhappy, they do not just hear scandal. They hear echo. That echo is part of what gives this rumor so much emotional charge. Because suddenly this is no longer only about Harry and Meghan as modern celebrity royals. It becomes about repetition. About whether a man who tried to escape the wounds of the past may have carried some of those same patterns with him after all. About whether breaking away from the institution was ever enough to break away from the emotional architecture formed inside it. That is a tragic possibility. And tragedy, more than gossip, is what keeps viewers emotionally hooked. Still, we have to say what responsible commentary requires us to say. None of this, at least publicly, has been conclusively proven. There is no verified confirmation from Harry. No verified confirmation from Meghan. No identified individual publicly acknowledged as some secret girlfriend in any confirmed, credible, on-record way. What exists are claims, suggestions, observations and interpretations. Some of those may one day amount to something.
Some may not.
That line matters. But disclaimers alone do not make the story disappear. Because even if you strip away the most scandalous interpretation, what remains is still fascinating: a marriage under scrutiny, a prince whose public life appears increasingly fragmented, a commentator bold enough to imply the existence of another emotional attachment, and an audience primed to connect the dots. That is not nothing. In fact, that may be the real reason this story has spread so quickly. Not because people enjoy cruelty. Not because they want collapse for the sake of entertainment. But because many feel they have been watching signs accumulate for a long time.
A pause here. A solo event there. An awkward distance in tone. A changed energy. A visible divergence in ambition. The kind of shifts that are easy to dismiss individually, but harder to ignore once placed side by side. And once someone like Lady C gives those fragments a possible interpretation, the fragments stop floating. They lock together. So what happens next? That depends on whether this rumor stays where it is now, in the realm of insinuation, or whether more details begin surfacing. If nothing more emerges, this may remain one of those royal stories that hangs in the air, shaping perception without ever fully hardening into fact. But if more voices echo it, if more public distance appears, if more unexplained behavior fuels the narrative, then this could become one of the most damaging shadow stories the Sussexes have faced in years. Because stories do not need formal confirmation to change public opinion. Sometimes they only need timing, repetition, and a public already prepared to believe them. And that may be the most important point of all. This is not just a rumor about another woman. It is a stress test for the entire Harry and Meghan narrative. It forces people to ask whether the image of total unity still holds. Whether the sacrifices Harry made brought him peace. Whether the life they built is stable, or simply well managed. Whether what the world has been shown is the full picture, or only the usable one. If Lady C is wrong, the rumor will eventually fade. But if she is even partly right, then we may be looking at the beginning of a much larger unraveling. And maybe that is why the reaction has been so intense. Because for a lot of people, this did not feel like the start of a story. It felt like the missing chapter of one already in progress.